Thorel the fisherman's son rowed his skiff to the markets at Oldtown. Their goodbye was brief, still the young boy couldn't help but blush whenever meeting her eye and warm smile. Brianna made her way through the markets that overlooked the harbour and the high tower of Oldtown. Numerous Greyjoy warships were anchored in the harbour. Brianna kept her head buried in the hood of her cloak. She had nothing else in her possession, save the clothes on her back and the small fishing knife gifted by Orell's father. She thought it curious that so many Iron Islanders were now present in the city. Only a handful of men were to bring her letter ashore to be sent to the capital. Brianna's escape had likely greatly altered Lord Valen's plans. The Ironborn walking amongst the streets did not seem to be searching, but rather enjoying themselves. One of their many port calls along the Sunset Sea. Brianna had grown accustomed to not drawing attention to herself. Rather than approach the islanders directly, Brianna knew she could elicit information from those in Oldtown the islanders would associate with. Drunken sailors rarely could help themselves when they had something interesting to discuss. Brianna approached innkeeps and tavern masters. Still no one wanted to discuss the visitors from the Iron Islands. A serving wench whispered in Brianna's ear, suggesting a specific brothel the Iron Islanders had been overheard discussing. Brianna took back to the streets as the sun set behind the high tower of Oldtown. In a rare occurrence, Brianna raised her head to take in the marvel that was the high tower. She gulped, knowing it was likely the location of her letter. It was far more likely Valen would send the letter from the high tower rather than from the citadel. The maesters likely had no affection for these pirates and likely would not entertain a bargain. Still, attempting to infiltrate the high tower would prove difficult, far more than breaking into the citadel. The letter wasn't the only prerogative of Brianna. She needed to get close to a pair of Ironborn, hopefully in the presence of a barrel of Dornish red. It seems the brothel would be her only option. The establishment was a few streets down from the market. It was a calculated risk. The farther she trekked away from the market, the more exposed she was. The Ironborn flooded the streets, making her way to the brothel more difficult. Once she arrived, at least half a dozen islanders lingered near the entrance. Brianna took to the side streets and noticed a cart offloading supplies. Ladies, some older and some younger, carried fresh produce and sacks of grain through a side entrance. Brianna took a chance and dropped her hood while throwing a sack of rice over her shoulder. She dropped her eyes and followed the young girl in front of her. Deeper into the building she walked when they abruptly reached the storeroom. Brianna walked past the storeroom and would pretend to be lost. Just as she assumed, the Ironborn sought entertainment. They could be heard well before they were seen, drinking deeply and reaching just as deep inside their entertainment. Brianna stared around a corner. She had never seen such acts before. She had always assumed such places to be one of abuse, but the girls seemed to be enjoying themselves as much as the men.
Or you lost girl.
Brianna was startled enough to drop her grain sack, spilling its contents onto the floor.
Stupid girl. What the hell were you doing? These are dangerous men. If you don't want to be taken against your will, you should remain in the storeroom.
The mysterious woman ordered. She seemed used to exercising authority while continuing to berate Brianna when she dropped to her knees to stuff the small grains of rice back into the burlap sack. Brianna kept her head down, but the woman had seemingly taken an interest in her. They were alone in the passageway. Still, the women could be heard all throughout the brothel. The unnamed woman bent down and grasped Brianna's face and forced her look. She was older than Brianna, attractive with flowing blonde hair and wearing expensive silks. Brianna forced herself to cry, attempting to bring attention to the pair of them. The blonde woman hushed and attempted to calm her.
Stop your wailing, girl.
She commanded with a firm, open-handed smack across Brianna's face.
You're not where you belong. Who put you on the load line? Those too young or too elder for work belong in here. You would be prime for our clientele this night. Do you even work for me?
Brianna continued to whimper as what she assumed was the brothel owner stood her up and pulled her cloak from her shoulders.
You're young, but not too young.
The owner gasped as she pulled Brianna's knife from her possession.
This is not one of mine. Out of place and a very good acting charade. Why are you here? And who sent you?
The brothel owner assumed, and Brianna now realized she could not feign innocence any longer, but perhaps innocence could be a means for her intrusion. She would have to be convincing and flattering. Brianna instantly ceased all emotion and stared deeply into this woman's beautiful eyes.
I am here for their captain, or their first mate. I am a recently escaped salt wife from the iron-born flagship Silence.
Brianna finished coldly and emotionless. The owner's face was first blank with shock and then flashed just a moment of sympathy before responding. She pulled the straps of Brianna's dress from over her shoulders and let her dress fall to the ground. She turned, noting some scrapes and bruising Brianna acquired from her aquatic escape.
It's difficult work here. Some girls take to it better than others. Occasionally a man will get abusive and he will then never walk into my establishment again, and in extreme circumstances, they will never walk again.
Brianna tilted her head, taking in the brothel owner's words and encouraging her to continue.
But the ravaging you must have endured. I cannot speak to. Please know you have my sympathy. How were you taken?
My father was a fisherman. My mother died of a fever a few years past. The islanders set upon our small fishing vessel and took me from my father. They took me again and again before they cut his throat. That was years before I ever saw the sun again.
Brianna lied. It was easier to recall a real story than to make up another under duress. It seemed to work as the blonde replaced her dress and reluctantly handed her back her knife.
And is the one you speak of the one who took you? Is he here in my establishment?
If Lord Theon Greyjoy had graced your establishment, milady, tell me now, or I shall depart with your blessing.
Brianna asked and received a delayed response as she seemed to wrestle with the decision. Apart from the financial loss, how would a simple brothel keep fair against the wrath of the entire Iron Islands if their captain and lord was murdered here? Still, Brianna assumed Lord Valen would not make port and she would be granted leave to exit the brothel.
I am no lady, my dear. Your own name is not important. But you may call me Madam Foxworth. The one you seek is here in a private room. Come with me. Who would I be to stand in the way of a salt wife's vengeance?
Brianna sighed in relief. Madame would know Brianna would have to keep her own identity concealed, but she seemed intelligent enough to conceive a plot. Brianna guessed this is not the first time Madame Foxworth has been in a situation such as this. They entered a dressing room which was empty but full of perfumed silks, wine and food. Brianna stared longingly as Madame approached her again, quickly removing her dress. She passed a plate of cheese to her as she might have appeared hungry. The Madame rummaged through trunks until she pulled a colourful, simple gown and held it up to Brianna, contrasting the colours with her eyes.
Put this on quickly now.
The Madame ordered as she started accenting Brianna's eyes.
How many of these men have ever complimented your eyes?
They were normally shut tightly, madame.
Brianna responded with a mouthful of food. Madame Foxworth sighed in disapproval.
Your eyes could reveal you. Here, cover your face. Don't react to anything said. You do not speak their language. You are a maiden just imported from Lys, and various lords are bidding for your maidenhood. A lord such as Valen would not take you, knowing some unnamed lord will be paying a hefty sum for you.
She instructed as she tied up her hair. The bun was just bulky enough to conceal her fishing knife for quick access, considering her gown left little to the imagination, and she likely would remove it quickly to take the attention off her eyes.
You can tempt, but do not give yourself to them. They will respect your perceived maidenhood. Make a show of yourself, and you will get close to them.
Brianna opened her mouth to retort, but the Madame quickly cut her off.
No! You did not understand. You cannot understand anything I have said. Stop reacting and start acting. Please realize both of our lives will be at risk in that room.
The Madame finished and quickly prepped herself in the mirror.
Remember to be tempting, but not too tempting. Remember they will believe you to have never known a man. Hear me, girl. I haven't worked for a winter and am willing to tonight. If and only if you make this man suffer.
The Madame finished bluntly and spun Brianna around by her shoulders and shoved her from the room. They entered the private room where she saw Valen off in the far corner with 2 women on either side of him. 3 other islanders were about the room in various stages of undress. One of them was Lord Harlaw, Lord Valen's first mate. Valen immediately stood to the dismay of the whores at his side. He approached Madame Foxworth and devilishly kissed the back of her hand.
Greetings, Madame. Please allow me to offer my gratitude. Your establishment is the finest on the Sunset Sea.
Valen complimented while making fierce eye contact with Brianna. The veil she wore seemed to properly conceal her identity from the Lord of the Tides.
Your men are always welcome here, my lord. It's so rare we find ourselves entertaining proper men vice the academics this city is overrun with.
The Madame flattered, yet Brianna's eyes seemed to be the only item of interest in the brothel.
Who is your lovely friend?
Lord Valen asked, though trying to mask his interest.
We haven't given her a name yet. She has just arrived from Lys. Many high lords have bid for her maidenhood, though I have yet to accept an offer.
The bidding is still open, I presume.
Valen asked with interest, to the Madame's slight chuckle.
Pardon me, my lord, but you would not only have to ransom your flagship, but the entirety of the Iron Fleet as well.
If this is true, then why bring this beauty before us?
Men are always attracted to what they cannot have. Men have spilled more seed just being in her presence. Would you care to find out why, my lord? She is however shy when surrounded by multiple men, though.
The Madame suggested to Valen's wide smile. Valen returned to his seat as he ordered 2 men to guard the door, so only Harlaw remained. Madame seductively removed Brianna's gown as it fell to the floor for the 3rd time today. The remaining girls left Valen's side and attempted to entertain his first mate. Madame Foxworth was now as naked as every other woman in the room. Lord Valen opened his robe as she slithered the length of her body along his. Brianna wasn't sure how she was to perform, as Valen refused to take his eyes off of her. Brianna remembered her captivity in the bowels of the Silence, and her torment of Lord Blacktide. Brianna strolled towards the back of the blonde head which now vigorously bobbed in Lord Valen's lap. Brianna felt herself and was shocked to feel the result. Valen's eyes seemed to encourage her to touch herself, and Brianna couldn't resist. It wasn't the first time Brianna had seen Lord Valen in full. He would likely torture and kill her the moment he realized who she was. Still, this excited Brianna even more. She wasn't sure if she was attracted to the danger, the sea captain, or perhaps both. Minutes had passed, and for just a moment she forgot where she was. She nearly finished, and Lord Valen seemed to be approaching that point as well. Brianna slowly approached the Madame, noting precisely her technique. Brianna grasped the long blonde braids and began guiding her head to Valen's response. Brianna enjoyed this immensely. She could control Valen without even making contact with him, which she found immensely arousing. She could not understand the feeling in the pit of her stomach while Valen was enjoying himself, but she wanted to be the one to finish him. Brianna felt guilty. A princess should not have such peasant emotions such as jealousy, though she could not help herself. Brianna wordlessly invited the Madame to occupy Lord Valen's mouth, as Brianna lowered herself in between Valen's knees. Brianna reached behind her own head to remove the knife from her hair. Madame Foxworth noticed this, and kissed Valen deeply, turning his head away from Brianna. Her dark hair then dropped to her shoulders. The Madame then took Brianna by her hand and seductively sucked on her fingers. Once finished, she turned to kiss Valen again, allowing him to taste her maidenhood.
Hoy, Captain. We're due at the High Tower in the morning. You better get a move on, eh?
The High Tower, not the Citadel, just as Brianna expected. She could escape now with the information she needed. Still, she couldn't remove herself from the sea captain. Her veil stayed in place as her long brown hair brushed against his length. He shivered violently as she continued. Likely a single stroke of her tongue would finish him at this point. Just as Brianna contemplated this, he exploded to several grunts and thrusts. Madame Foxworth gingerly encouraged him to continue as Brianna refused to back away. Madame laughed encouragingly as she was proven correct and Valen was in agreement. Brianna quickly removed herself, glancing over her shoulder at the Lord of the Iron Islands. She longingly wanted to stay, but she had a letter to intercept at the top of the High Tower. She quickly returned to the dressing room, removing her veil and searching for her clothes. Madame Foxworth returned quickly, curious to Brianna's intentions.
Why let that bastard live?
she demanded, returning the short blade to Brianna.
It wasn't him.
Brianna admitted, attempting to remove the sticky clumps from her hair. Madame Foxworth slowly approached her, her face full of skepticism.
Who are you? Really?
Someone who will ensure you will never have to work again. If I live through the night,
I see. How can I help you?
you can get me into the High Tower.
The lady asks too much. It is impossible to infiltrate without an army. Perhaps not even then.
Then some climbing boots then.
Brianna demanded, and Madame Foxworth grinned, seemingly impressed with the dark-haired princess who never revealed her name.